All right, Rob.
Okay, you can find the third step prayer on page 63 of your big book. Hope everybody's got your big book handy, a highlighter and a pen and a piece of paper. God,
God,
I offer
I
myself
offer
to thee,
myself to thee,
to build with
to
me
build
and do
with
with me as
and do
thou
with
wilt.
me as thou wilt. Relieve
Leave
me
me
of
of
the
the bondage
bondage
of
of
self,
self,
that I may better
that I
do
may
thy will.
better do thy will. Take away
My
my
difficulties,
difficulties,
that victory over them
that victory over them
may
may
bear
bear witness
witness
to
to
those
those I
thou
would
would
help
help
of thy
of thy
power,
power,
thy love,
thy
and
love,
thy way of
and
life.
thy way of life. May I do
thy
thy will
will
always.
always.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Well, we are in the forward to the second edition and about halfway through it. What we'll do, Rob, if you will, we'll kind of back up just a little bit on page XVI and start at the bottom there at this position.
Okay, page XVI, everybody. This physician has repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silk's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered, never drank again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Hence,
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, Rob. Okay, gotcha. A couple of things here is that, I think this is something that we would want to talk about for just a second, and that is the physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma. And now I was talking about this earlier, that there's a difference between a religious kind of approach and a spiritual approach. And part of this is that Dr. Bob, as we know, was very religious. He was a part of the Oxford group and very involved with them. So there was at least a point in time where he was trying prayer and working with a religious God, if you will, to try and avail himself of his alcoholism, and he wasn't really getting any results from it, not good ones anyway. It took a little bit of the scientific side of things to kind of talk about the description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, and what we know of that, which we will find out more, is about the allergy and the malady. And when we get to the doctor's opinion, we'll talk about that in much more detail. But the point being is that it took a bit of additional kind of knowledge and experience with this to get Dr. Bob, in order to get him to channel his efforts and his attempts to find that spiritual experience that he was going to ultimately have that would give him the strength to not ever drink again. And then second here, with regard to this particular paragraph, it seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another. This is the first place where we kind of see that the idea behind this is that, nobody can reach another alcoholic like another alcoholic. And the reason being is that they have a like experience. They have been there, done that. They have, they know what it's like to have that urge, that craving for a drink. And then once you get that drink, you kind of want to get the thirstier you get, and that allergy kicks in. A non-alcoholic just doesn't have that experience, nor do they really get it. I'm not saying that those that haven't been through this book or haven't had the opportunity to learn more about alcoholism don't get it, but they really, it's kind of, you need to have done this with somebody that you've been with. And the other part of it here is that we've talked about strenuous work. This is important to kind of note, that it's not just talking to another alcoholic, although that's very good help. It's really that intensive kind of work that we're looking for, to have you work one-on-one with another alcoholic in order to get that permanent recovery. Rob?
Yeah, the work is taking somebody through the steps. And as we're going to see all through the book, step 12 is mentioned. It also indicated, as Leo mentioned, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. You have to remember that. And as I said, all through the book, you're going to see step 12 mentioned. You know what? When Bill was at his lowest point, what did he do? Went to help somebody else, get himself out of himself, worries about somebody else. So we're on page XVII, everybody. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. Never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time.
Right. And this is just some good historical perspective on things. Between Bill and Dr. Bob, they decided that with the success that they'd had with each other, that they were going to be able to take this approach. And they were at the Akron City Hospital, where Dr. Bob had privileges at the time and was basically asking and looking for alcoholics that were coming in, and we're looking for more of the desperate types. And when we talk about the first one, or the first case, and it's a desperate one, we're talking about Bill Dodson. And just so you know, he became AA member number 3, and his story is on page 182. They also talk about some of the failures. The fact is that not everybody gets this, especially even their first time. So they did, have a number of failures, but I think that the idea behind this, and really Dr. Bob more than Bill to a certain extent, Dr. Bob actually in Akron was an incredibly successful person in working with other alcoholics. In comparison to others, his success rate was just that much higher. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. And I guess when we get to Dr. Bob's story, after we've been through the first portion of the book, we can talk more about that. But he was ultimately responsible for some 5,000 alcoholics. And it was just an incredible number in the years that he had left in his life that he had dedicated and devoted to others. Now, the other thing I think is kind of an interesting thing here from a historical perspective is that Bill wasn't working, and he was able to spend about 3 months in Akron working with Dr. Bob. And what is important, I think, here is, one, that he was able to do that, but two, is that they were basically forming and reinforcing that foundation of what will become Alcoholics Anonymous. At the time, they didn't call it that. We're well before that happening, some years anyway. But nonetheless, I think it's an interesting thing that both Dr. Bob and Bill were able to spend the kind of time that they did during that summer, working with other alcoholics. And a lot of it was done, and most of it was done through the Oxford group at this point. Rob?
Beautiful. We're on page XVII for those that just joined us. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having sustained sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcohol.
Yeah, and just as an aside, at this point in time, Bill and Bob had counted about 40 people recovered in this from a historical perspective. But what is important here too to pick up is that it only takes a couple of people to form an AA group, and that's what was starting to happen. Other than the fact that the Akron group was growing by leaps and bounds compared to others, and the New York group had formed, it was a relatively small one in comparison to Akron, but they were actually having a group of some size as well. So at this point, I think the important part is that there was about 40 recovered people using the approach of in the program of AA as it was prescribed at that point in time.
Leo, I think you also need a coffee pot.
And a couple of cookies, I would say. Yes,
So
absolutely.
that's in the US, you get cookies. In Canada, we don't get cookies or donuts.
Oh, that's right. I remember you saying that. Yep, that is true.
It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous. From the title of its own book, the flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time.
Yeah, and when we talk about the flying blind period, we're talking about the years between 1934 and 1939 as a point of reference. And when they talked about the spring of 1939, it was actually on April 10th of 1939 that this book was first published, if anybody is interested in that. And they were talking about 100 men and women at the time of recovered alcoholics, which is where we get this the first 100. So and I think it's a nice thing that they were basically talking about Alcoholics Anonymous now and calling it that. If you remember, part of the what they were looking at was the 100 men. As far as who named it, it was Hank Parkhurst and Joe Warden. They had considered names such as 100 Men, The Way Out, and the Bill W. movement. That's ultimately settled on Alcoholics Anonymous. Rob?
Okay. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Ulster, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery.
I think important here is that, isn't it interesting that people could get sober just by reading this book? Back in this time, I think it's just amazing now because we really do, we use this book, we read this book, we subscribe to the program that's within it and everything, but I can only imagine what it would have been like for me to have just picked up this book and tried to get sober myself. It really would have been difficult. So I'm really kind of in awe and amazed that people were able to get sober just by reading the book. Now, the other part of it is that the popularity, we're growing from, over a couple of years now to up to 100 people now within just a short period of time. In a year, they're now at 800 alcoholics who are on their way to recovery. So you can start to see some of the exponential growth that's happening. Rob?
Yep. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, membership has shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution.
Yeah, what a nice thing to have. And really, there's not much to add to this other than the fact that within just another couple of years, they went from 800 to 2,000 and then to 8,000 members. largely because of the publications that had carried the story out to the rest of the people in the nation. And I can only imagine this office of just a few people and having these little cards come in, ordering books and such, that it was a pretty amazing time for them, and having the likes of people like John D. Rockefeller Jr., really start to influence the expansion of it. Rob?
Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene.
Yeah, anything that has that type of explosive growth over a short period of time is going to be fraught with different problems and challenges. And certainly so, there were any number of things that were going on where there were qualifications for membership. At one point in time, anecdotally, there were certain groups that had upwards of 100 questions that you had to answer just to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And ultimately, as we've all known, just from that point alone, is that we came to the one and true only requirement, and that is the desire to stop drinking, and you're in. Just as an aside, the word schism is also the word for disagreements. So just to kind of have that as a point of reference. Rob?
Yeah, anybody that has been to a business meeting can certainly understand all the things that can split a group apart. I'll be honest with you, the first two business meetings that I was involved in or went to, people quit because they didn't get their own way. It's group conscience, and when things don't go their way, people leave and they start up their own group. Remember, all you need is another alcoholic and a coffee pot, and you can start your own group. So, it's things like that a newcomer sees this. And you know what? I've been in the fellowship for almost 9 years now, and I do not like going to business meetings still because of that. It just, I always work. I'm a people pleaser, and I'm better at it now because I've learned a spiritual kit of tools to use: pause, and also pray for people. But the whole idea is that, it still bothers me that those people had to leave, so keep that in mind. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, we had to evolve principles by which the A groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and film, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies.
Yeah, so a lot of teeth gnashing went into this one paragraph alone, and there was a lot of things that were actually done in order to get AA to where it is today, and this is a lot of it. We're talking about the principles here. We're talking about the 12 steps and the 12 traditions that came out of that. It's important that we also note that this is not professional therapy. It is a solution to alcoholism, and it's not considered as professional therapy. An attraction rather than promotion. I think that that's another important part of it. Although you know, we put out there things like our Facebook pages and some of the YouTube channels that we have and that type of thing. I would say that that's right up against the edge, you know. I mean, it's not so much that it's being promoted, but it's just it's available resources to be able to get a continued and an expanded message, and be a part of a fellowship in such a way that it's in this case it would be electronic. The important, and this is one of the most important, is being anonymous, not only from the press, radio, TV, and films, but just anonymous, period. There's a lot of sensitivity, even to this day, about alcoholics and things like their careers and jobs and that type of thing. And some of the groups that we frequent, and sometimes it's better left unsaid that we are recovered alcoholics or recovering alcoholics. And obviously the endorsements and make alliances, the political things, etc. Those are just resentments waiting to happen if people get involved in them. It's just rather genius that they actually said that they wouldn't be a part of this. So a lot of good stuff coming out of this at this point in time. And Bill was responsible for a lot of this as well. He was fighting a lot of that, which with regard to, you know, there was exclusions in certain groups of certain people, whether it be race or creed or sex. And so that is also something that was overcome, and for good reason.
Wait,
Bob?
channel.
1 second. Yeah, and the only thing I want to say is that the highest level you can get in AA is sober. That's what it's all about. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has.
Yeah. So we'll just keep reading, Rob.
Yep. While the internal difficulties of our adolescence period was being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large number of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed.
Important note here, and this is something I highlighted and even underlined in places here. It's that these made their impressions everywhere. Now, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, so we're not just talking about every person that walked through the door, that sat in a meeting, that were a part of the fellowship and that type of thing. We're talking about people that actually came into the program, actually applied the program and committed themselves to the program. 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% of this group sobered up after some relapses, right? And those are what we have come to know or will know as the educational kind that took some time to really kind of get used to the fact that they could do it and also get tired of the consequences. And then among the remainder, another 25%, who stayed on with AA showed some improvement, meaning that they drank less and less. But this is a statistic that we have anecdotally as well as largely the same today. And again, we're talking about the population of people that come to AA that really try, that actually commit themselves to the program and attempt to get sober and stay sober. So it's, in my opinion, when you look at it that way, the success rate is pretty good. I mean, we'd love to see it be higher than 75%. But for the most part, you're talking about, 3 out of every 4 people that commit themselves to getting sober actually get sober and stay sober. And then that other fourth, that other person actually improves over a period of time, which is really, really good. And the thousands that came to AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, I mean, they just simply weren't done drinking yet. And that's a group of people that gets exposed to AA, that gets familiar with AA, and over time, a few of them may actually come into the fold and actually attempt and commit themselves to the program. But nonetheless, those are also people that we have even to this day that just aren't done drinking and are essentially just not ready to commit themselves. Rob?
Okay. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was administrations of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book.
Well, yeah, and absolutely. So we're going to see some information from Dr. Silkworth, which will get introduced here very shortly. And at the same time, who doesn't take the recommendation, overall, as far as acceptance of a professional doctor or clergy, and so there's just a lot of goodness that's coming out of these folks that are actually recommending. They're sending people to this program of AA, and they're finding people that have been recovered and asking them to go and actually find people. I think another point here is that remember that this program is not a medical or religious one. It's a spiritual one, which is there is some differences between that and a religious program. Rob?
Yeah, Leo, the only thing I'll add to that is that if you need outside medical help, get it. AA is not medical help. Okay, if you have other issues, then we suggest go and see those medical people. It'll tell you in this book a little further on that you know what, they have good ideas, and they mean well. So, because I've heard too many times of AA members saying, all you need is God, and you can get off that medication. We don't suggest that at all. We are not doctors. Okay, if you think somebody needs to get off medication, have them go to their doctor and speak to their doctor about it. We are not medical doctors. Leo can tell you about that.
Yeah.
Alcohol being no respecter. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization, nor does AA take any particular medical point of view, but we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion.
Yeah, we'll keep going there.
Okay.
Rob, you just made a great point or disclaimer with regard to that. And it is important to note that we are accepted both medically and through the religions. And what's nice about that is that we've got a steady stream of people being recommended actively into the program, which is nice because that just is a good way to approach it. And I heard another person the other day that was talking, and they had an evaluation that they were going through with the doctor, and the doctor determined that there wasn't anything that they could prescribe at the time, but they did say that the work with AA is an important one and that they do subscribe to that, and that they felt that this person should continue that work, that strenuous work that they were doing in an effort to make sure that they stayed better in that regard. So a great recommendation from the medical community.
Beautiful. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America. And in distant lands, the same demographic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women.
Yep, the big message here is just this: everyone, and I mean everyone, is allowed to be in AA, regardless. So, Rob?
At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of 7 million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet, it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book, and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom.
Yeah. And I think really important point here is there's many ways to get sober. So when they say that they have no monopoly, this is one program. This is one way to get sober. It is a very good way that I would tell you that I would try first and foremost. But it works for most alcoholics. And I also, just from a standpoint of me personally, I only work with this particular program. I don't work with any of the other programs. All right, Rob, let's turn the page and start the forward to the third edition.
Okay, forward to the third edition, page XXII, everybody. Forward to the third edition. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries.
Yep. And so we've got some real explosive growth here that's going on. Nothing more really to add to that, Rob, is just point out and just wow. There's a lot of growth, a lot of things going on. Rob?
Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicated that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of the AA surveyed are less than 30 years of age. Among them, many in their teens.
I'm always amazed at that last statistic. And I would tell you that the people that are in their 20s and early 30s, they struggle mightily with the idea that they can never safely drink again. And being an alcoholic and identifying with it at that early age, you really have to approach it somewhat differently than you might approach somebody that might be 60 years old and having had 40 years of drinking under their belt. Because one, the 60-year-old, you can equate to a lot of consequences, a lot of broken relationships, a lot of lost jobs, a lot of lost time, et cetera, and it's overwhelming. Whereas for a young person, yeah, they've had a couple of scrapes, they've had a couple of problems, they might have lost a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they may have even, lost a job or two, but they still are looking at it that they have their whole life left to live in front of them. And it's that concept that they have to give up alcohol, which is so woven into the fabric of their life at that point, whereas that is a very, very tough thing for them to get a hold of. So I'm always appreciative of a young person who is able to rise above that particular challenge and be able to accept this program and really do great with it. The one thing that I always tell people that are young and are actually recovering is that their health is probably going to be much better than the 60-year-old person that's actually trying to recover after 40 years of drinking, because the damage of 40 years of drinking is far worse than the damage of, say, maybe 5 or 8 years of drinking at a young age. So really, really important point. And the other point I would like to make here with regard to the membership is that there are all types of people that are here. And as far as women, you can actually look at this room alone and see that there is, upwards of 50 or more % of women that are now involved in the program of AA. And it's no longer kind of this men's club that it was back in the early years in time. So all good stuff here. Rob?
The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Las Dos Pesos in one country, Les Deux Etapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, not much to say there other than your French is really good there, Rob.
Oh,
He's a Canadian.
très bien.
right.
In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah, that's a good, simple, just straightforward message. Again, one alcoholic talking to another and sharing their experience, strength, and hope. And that's an important distinction too. Now, just kind of as a sidebar, what Alcoholics Anonymous is not, and I mean this sincerely, is not just somebody sitting down and talking about their week and whining or complaining about something. It is, in fact, more about the experience they had with alcohol, the strength that they found by finding their higher power, and how they have lived their lives going forward with that higher power and having had that spiritual experience. It's just to make sure that we discern between good fellowship in the program and bad fellowship in what is not the program. Rob?
Yeah, what I want to say about in the third edition, if you notice, "we" was never used. This was written in 1976. Bill Wilson passed away in 1971. Bill had done the other forwards. Okay. In the second edition, "we" was used 10 times, and I believe it was used 18 times in the forward to the first edition. So "we" is not used. And also, but what is put in here right at the bottom, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Step 12. Always sneaking that in, always getting that in.
Yep.
So forward to the fourth edition, which is page XXIII, everybody. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off press in November 2001, at the start of the new millennium. Since the third edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too is that they talk about this, 1976 to 2001, and they grew to 2 million. So in essence, their growth has probably been on par with what they were growing from 1939 to 1976 with the first million. So if you kind of take the years that they're going with, they're slightly faster if you kind of count it all up, but it is still that they are growing at a steady rate in regards to that. Now, we didn't quite get, the groups though, that's a whole different story there with regard to that's almost 4 times the growth, or at least 3 times the growth of what they had in the beginning instead of just twice the growth. So groups are expanding. They're maybe not quite as big as they were before, but that's okay. Again, we've talked about even 2 people can make a group, and then the growth from 90 to 150 countries. It just, that doesn't sound like that much, but when you talk about translations into different languages, that's quite a feat, quite a feat. Rob?
Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, and growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages, and there's an asterisk here. In 2019, Alcoholics Anonymous is in 71 languages. Wow.
And not only that, Rob, but to build on this, if we were to add just a couple of sentences, I think with the pandemic and the growth of the electronic meetings through Zoom, for example, has been amazing. And I can tell you now that we're bringing people together like never before. And it's one thing to have, a person from state to state being in a group together. It's another thing wholly to have different countries that have different languages coming together with a common language, in this case of English. But the point being is that we've got people from all different parts of the United States as far as in the world. We've even got people coming in from Mumbai and the Netherlands, Canada, United States, Mexico, England. It just goes on and on and on. And I think what is really neat about that is that in my wildest dreams, I never thought that I was going to be in a group of people that had so many different countries, cultures, and languages to be able to come together.
It is wild, Leo, when you think about it. Netherlands, never forget the Netherlands. We love them.
Yep.
As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could ever have imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually every one of the first 100 members could have hoped to reach.
Yeah, it really is mind-boggling and somewhat humbling to think in terms of what has actually happened. I think it does a really good job in this forward to the fourth edition of really identifying with the mix of people that we now have as part of AA, whether regardless of sex, whether their religion, their language, where they're from. I would vastly the vast numbers of electronic groups that have come together. I can only imagine now what this actually number is with regard to how many groups that we actually have now. I'm going to guess that within just a couple of years, I mean, the percentages are just immense in regards to how many of these electronic groups we've got compared to just the face-to-face, in-person groups that we have as well. And I can, any advancement in technology or anything that has to do with that type of thing is just mind-boggling to the generation before, because they've not ever experienced it until later in life. I know for a fact that I'm just amazed that at the growth that I've seen over the last couple of years, but also I can only imagine what it would have been like for the first 100 members if they were still alive to be able to look around and see exactly what has happened with AA. Rob?
Leo, I'm going to tell you what's going on in Toronto. A lot of the groups that I went to in Toronto before the pandemic are still not open. There is one meeting that I used to go to every Thursday that is supposed to open in 2 weeks. So my home group that I belong to still has not opened. So there are an awful lot of groups in Toronto. Some were classified as they were a necessity, because people needed the meetings, and so they stayed open. But it's few and far between. And a lot of the groups that were in churches, the churches don't want them back. They're all worried about it. So you know what? We keep our fingers crossed, and there are still in-person meetings, but they're few and far between compared to what they used to be. There used to be a time when I could go to 4 or 5 different meetings a night. Now I'm lucky if I can find 2. So, times have changed. So I am so grateful for Zoom and what it's been able to do. In Toronto, they didn't teach a lot about the Big Book. Trying to find a Big Book meeting, forget it. 12 and 12, yeah, you could find dozens of them, but they didn't teach the Big Book. That's why, when the pandemic hit and I saw that there were Big Book meetings, I jumped at it because I couldn't get anything here. Now, you know what? Just our group alone, Leo, 16 Big Book meetings a week. Yep. 16. And we have maybe 30 members, everybody, Big Book. You know what? We learned this is the program. Meetings are the fellowship, and I can't tell you enough how much this has helped me. And how I love to share it with people, share it with you, Leo. And Pinto Pete's always got a smile on his face. He's in Vancouver. Love you, brother.
Yeah.
I digress and I go on. While the literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. In any meeting anywhere, AA share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics, modem to modem or face to face. AA speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity.
Yeah, there's an important message that I'll say just to kind of finish out this part with the forward of the 4th edition is that the message of AA never changes. It never changes. It always stays the same. And the only thing that really does change is the fellowship and the way that we carry that said message. And we've just been talking about that. And I think it's important to note that, you know, we've kept the first portion of the book exactly the same over all these years because it works. Stories in the back have changed, but that's in order to keep up with, you know, the changing in society as far as the fellowship goes. But really, the important thing to note here with this particular fellowship is the fact that we really are talking about a fellowship that talks about the experience, strength, and hope as it applies to the program. And we're not talking about the groups of people that come together just to share their week and discussion about how they, you know, might feel on that any given day. In addition to that, I think it's also important that there's a lot of fellowships out there that, you know, will read from the big book, but they just take a paragraph at a time and they talk about kind of how they feel about that as opposed to what the message is really there. How do you apply it to sponsorship? And how do you work with another person? And that's one of the distinctions I think is important here. Okay, we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. I'd like to stop here a little bit early today and ask Bill if you would give us some of your insight, and then we'll start with the doctor's opinion next time. Bill?
Yeah, hi, this is Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, Leo and Rob. Good job here. There's a lot of information here in this forward to the 2nd edition. There's a lot of history and stuff that went on in the beginning of AA and how AA got started. And to try to go through it all would really take a long time because there's a lot of stuff here that went on with AA number 3 and how the group started to grow and how they got together and the traditions. Bill came up with the traditions and started writing them. And there's just a lot of information here. They have the flying blind period. Like you mentioned, that was from the beginning of AA until 1939 when the book came out. They considered that the flying blind period. And all these different things that went on. Fulton Ulster from Liberty Magazine printed an article on alcoholics and God, and that got a lot of people interested. And then Jack Alexander, he wrote an article in the Saturday Evening Post, which was a real big publication back then at that time. And like 2,000 people or 8,000 people deluged them. So by putting this thing in, having somebody write these things out in the media, you got a lot of people come in. That's one of the reasons Cleveland grew so fast, because there was a newspaper out in Cleveland called the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and one of the reporters from that newspaper put an article in about the Cleveland AA. That's why the Cleveland groups grew so fast. When you start to put this out in the media, that's what really makes AA grow very quickly, when it starts to become found out by a lot of different people. You know, when we just try to spread it word of mouth, it's a lot slower of a process. And they say in here that AA was growing at 20% a year in the forward to the 2nd edition. We're nowhere near that anymore. You know, if you just look at the forward to the 3rd edition, it says we have 1 million people. If you take 20% of 1 million, that's 200,000. That would double. That would double in less than 5 years. And it took 25 years for it to double when the 4th edition came out. So we're nowhere near 20% anymore. I don't know why, but our membership is starting to slow down. It's not growing like it was. And like Rob mentioned, in the forward to the 1st edition, we was mentioned 18 times. in the forward to the second edition, we was mentioned 10 times. It's not mentioned in the fourth or the third edition. And that's because those two editions were not written by Bill Wilson, because he passed away in 1971. So Bill was a we person, and whoever wrote these other forwards was not a we person. And that's kind of like where I think AA started going from a we program to a me program. And that may be one of the reasons why it's not taken off as good as it used to, because more people are just interested in themselves rather than being interested in everybody else. And this book is always talking about trying to help others and work with others. Like in the forward to the second edition, like was pointed out, it says it also indicated strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Back in the beginning, that's what they were interested in. They were interested in carrying this message to somebody else. And the reason they were doing that is because that's what kept them sober. And today, it's kind of like it's turned into a me program instead of a we program. And it's unfortunate. But there is a lot of information here. And all the way on the last page, on the forward to the fourth edition, it says modem to modem or face to face. People don't have modems anymore. But that's basically talking about being on the internet, and we could call that Zoom meetings today. So they didn't even know this stuff was going to happen, but they realized that there's other ways to spread the message than just doing it in a face-to-face meeting. You can have a meeting online. And these online meetings today, thank God they're here, because like Rob was talking about, most of the face-to-face meetings in the area I'm in are shut down, and they're still shut down. One or two or three of them have opened up again, but it's nothing like it used to be. So thank God for these Zoom meetings, because we can still keep in touch with each other. And it's not exactly the same as a face-to-face, but it's pretty close. So that's basically all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thank you, Bill. And
Thanks, Bill.
great stuff. I know that we're moving through the book. It's a little bit slower at this point, but I would tell you that we're getting ready to jump into parts of this book that I think that most people really enjoy, and that is this next upcoming thing is going to be the doctor's opinion. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out. Rob, if you'll give us the serenity prayer, that'd be great.
Be my pleasure. Serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Okay, we will open it up for some discussion.
Paula, recovered alcoholic, if it's okay to ask a question, please.
Sure.
Are you still recording? Or
Oh, sorry, I'll get that stopped.